There's a room in your mind you haven't entered since you were 6. The door is held shut by every memory you've replayed and never revised. And tonight you're going to learn how to open it. By the end of the next 70 minutes, you'll own a 9-minute pre-sleep protocol, a simple one. You'll take the worst moment of today, the cold dismissal, the missed beat, the email you wish you hadn't sent, and you'll rewrite it before sleep, not in a journal, not on paper, in the only place memory actually lives. And you'll fall asleep on the revised version, which is the part nobody tells you matters most. If something in this is already pulling at you, a quiet tap on like helps it find the next person who needs to hear it. And if there's a memory rising in you right now, even one word about it in the comments, drop it. Don't be shy, because half the work of this teaching is hearing how it lands in other people. Subscribe if you want more like this. That's all I'll say about that. Now, let me tell you the cost of not understanding what I'm about to teach you. Every time you replay an old grievance, you cast a vote for its continuation. Your subconscious doesn't tally your wishes, it tallies your repetition. And the loudest, most rehearsed scene in your interior life is the one it's currently building into your tomorrow. You think you're remembering. You're not. You're commissioning. Each replay is an order placed with a craftsman who never sleeps. He builds what you keep describing. That's why the same boss keeps showing up wearing different faces. Why the same partner appears in a different body, a different city, the same wound dressed in fresh clothes. Why the financial pinch reshuffles into a new shape every March. You think life is repeating itself. It isn't. You are. And the subconscious is loyal to your repetitions, not your intentions. There's a deeper cost than the recurring situation. It's this: a mind that doesn't trust itself can't run any law. If your interior life is a courtroom where you're forever the defendant, no manifestation technique will work for you. The technique isn't the problem, the defendant is. And you've been the defendant since you were 6. I want you to feel the weight of that for a moment, because it isn't a metaphor. Sit with the math of your own day. Count the replays, count the times today between 7 a.m. and now that you mentally re-entered a room you'd already left. The argument with your spouse from Tuesday. The text you sent at 11 p.m. last night that no one's answered. The look on your manager's face when you turned in the report. You re-entered those rooms 3, 6, sometimes 12 times today. And each re-entry was a vote. The servant doesn't ask whether you wanted to vote. The servant doesn't ask whether you meant it. The servant tallies the visits. The room you visited most this week is the room you're going to be assigned next week. That's not punishment. That's not karma. That's just the mechanism. The mechanism doesn't care about your preferences. It only cares about your attention. And the attention you've been giving, for decades in some cases, has been almost entirely backward. Backward into a record you didn't realize was editable. Backward into a transcript you didn't realize was being rewritten by every replay. You thought you were just remembering, you were authoring. So tonight we're going to teach you to be the editor instead. The man who taught this, taught it cleaner than anyone before or since, was Neville Goddard, Barbadian. Came to New York in 1922 as a dancer. Met his teacher, a black Ethiopian rabbi named Abdullah, in 1930, and spent 40 years lecturing in small rooms in Los Angeles, New York, and San Francisco on exactly one idea: that imagination is the only reality, and that the past you imagine is more real than the past you remember. I want to slow down on that teacher for a second, because it matters who Goddard learned this from. Abdullah was older, black, Ethiopian, a teacher of Hebrew and esoteric scripture who'd set up a small school on West 72nd Street in Manhattan in the late 1920s. Goddard walked in one afternoon in 1930. He was 25. He was broke. He'd been a Broadway dancer, and he was now mostly an unemployed Broadway dancer, and someone had told him about the old man on the West Side who taught a different kind of Bible. The first thing Abdullah told him when Goddard arrived was that he'd been expecting him. Goddard, of course, had told no one he was coming. Abdullah said he'd seen Goddard in his imagination 6 months earlier and had simply been waiting. He pointed at the seat across from him. He told Goddard to sit. And the next 7 years of Goddard's education were conducted in that room. Hebrew, Kabbalah, the inner meaning of Scripture, and one peculiar instruction that ran underneath all of it, that the imagination is not a faculty. The imagination is the operating system. Everything else is downstream. Goddard left Abdullah's school in 1937. He started lecturing publicly. He wrote his first book in 1939. By 1942, when the draft notice arrived, he'd been teaching this material for 5 years, and he was about to test it himself in conditions he hadn't asked for. After the war, he moved his lecturing to Los Angeles. The 1948 series at Wilshire Bell is the one most students know. 5 Sunday lectures in May, all transcribed by a stenographer, all still circulating in worn-out paperbacks and PDFs 60 years later. In those lectures, he taught revision in plain English. He told the audience to take the worst moment of the day and reimagine it before sleep until it felt real in the body. He told them not to argue with their resistance. He told them not to check the next morning. He told them repeatedly that the practice was useless until they understood that the imagination was not a hobby of the mind. It was the engine of the world. People came back. They came back week after week with stories. A woman who'd been estranged from her brother for 11 years revised one specific argument from 1937 for 7 nights. The brother called her on the 8th morning. A man whose mortgage was 3 months delinquent revised the moment the bank officer had said no, replaying it as a yes for 2 weeks, and the bank of its own accord restructured the loan in his favor. A father whose teenage son had stopped speaking to him revised one specific dinner table moment for a month, and the son, without explanation, started calling. Goddard didn't pretend these stories were guaranteed. He didn't promise outcome. He said every time that the technique worked to the degree the student was willing to let the body soften into the revised version. He said most students never got that far because they treated the practice as visualization. Visualization is a head game. Revision is a body event. The difference is everything. He kept teaching this until he died in 1972 in Los Angeles at the age of 72. He left thousands of pages of transcribed lectures. He left no chain of disciples. He left no foundation. He left no certified instructors. What he left was a method. Test the method. He didn't say believe him. He said test him. Run the protocol. Watch what happens. And the protocol, the one we're going to walk through tonight, starts in the only territory you genuinely own, the past. The future, Goddard said, isn't yours yet. You're trying to influence a country you haven't been issued a passport to. The present is too crowded, too many witnesses, too much resistance, too much inertia from yesterday. But the past is yours. It's a room with no one else in it. And you've been locked out of that room since you were 6 because someone told you somewhere that the past was the one thing you couldn't change, that someone was wrong. And the price of believing them is currently being deducted from your life every morning at 7 a.m. when you open your eyes into a tomorrow that's just a sequel. So here's the question I want you to hold while I tell you the rest of this. What if the only room where any of this works, the only room where the law of assumption, the law of attraction, the law of whatever name you give it, actually functions, is the room you've been forbidden to enter? And what if the door has been unlocked the entire time, just waiting for one person to push? Hold that question. We're going to walk through it together. But first, you need to meet the man who walked through it himself. And the room he walked into wasn't a metaphor. It was a barracks in Louisiana in 1942 on a cot stamped property of the United States Army. Let me tell you what he did there. Neville Goddard was 37 years old when the draft notice arrived. He built a quiet life in New York. He was lecturing in a rented hall on West 49th Street. He had a wife, a young daughter, a circle of students who came on Sunday afternoons to hear him talk about Abdullah and the inner man. And then, in late 1941, the country went to war, and a letter arrived telling him to report to Camp Polk, Louisiana, for induction into the United States Army. He didn't argue with the letter. He went. By March of 1942, he was in a barracks at Camp Polk, a hastily built training base in the piney woods of west central Louisiana, about 100 miles south of Shreveport. The air there in March smells like wet pine resin and diesel and the particular tang of canvas tents drying in humid heat. The barracks were long wooden buildings on concrete piers with screened windows that did nothing against the mosquitoes. 40 cots to a building, a potbelly stove at one end, a latrine 50 yards through the mud. Goddard, at 37, was older than most of the men around him. He was a vegetarian, he didn't drink, he didn't smoke, and he had the bearing of a man who'd spent 12 years teaching that imagination is God, which is not a bearing the Army knows what to do with. He filed an application for discharge. He stated his case, his age, his family, his occupation. The colonel in charge of his unit reviewed it. The colonel stamped it disapproved. And then the colonel told Neville, in the polite Louisiana way of a man who's heard this story before, that he would be staying, that every man stayed, that there was a war on and the Army had decided he was needed and that was the end of it. Most men would have accepted that. Most men would have called their wife, written a sad letter home, and started learning to march. Goddard that night went to his cot. He lay on his back in the dark. He listened to the breathing of 39 other men around him. He felt the heat of the Louisiana spring through the wool blanket. And he began to do the only thing he knew how to do. He revised, he imagined the colonel's office, the desk, the afternoon light through the Venetian blind, the colonel sitting across from him, and the colonel saying calmly and clearly that he was approved for discharge. He imagined the stamp coming down on the page. Not disapproved, approved. He imagined himself walking out of the office with his papers in his hand. He imagined the dust on his boots as he walked down the wooden steps. He imagined the train back to New York, the smell of the station, his daughter running across the apartment floor. He ran the scene once, then he ran it again. Then he fell asleep inside it. He did this on the second night, and the third, and the fourth. I want you to picture those nights from his side, because they weren't dramatic. They were tedious. There's nothing cinematic about a 37-year-old man lying on a cot in a wool blanket, listening to the snoring of 39 strangers, trying to picture an office he'd seen exactly once. The first night, the scene was thin. The colonel's face was indistinct. The desk was a blur. The stamp coming down felt theatrical. The walk back to the train was a kind of cartoon. The second night, the colonel's face had more detail. The third night, he could see the Venetian blinds and the way the Louisiana afternoon light cut through them. The fourth night, he could hear the colonel's voice, slower than he'd imagined it the first night, with a slight Louisiana drawl of a man who'd been at this base for too long. By the fifth night, the scene had stopped being a performance and started being a memory. Goddard later said this was the moment that mattered, the moment the revised version began to feel like a memory of something that had happened, instead of a fantasy of something he wanted. That's the transition you're listening for tonight too. Not the moment the revised scene becomes elaborate, the moment it becomes ordinary. On the 9th morning before Reveille, Goddard was lying on his cot when the door of the barracks opened and the colonel walked in. And I want to cut here, because the part most people don't tell you isn't what the colonel said. It's what Goddard saw at 4 a.m. that morning, before the colonel arrived. There was a moment in the dark when Goddard knew. And what he saw in that moment, what he never quite wrote down, is the entire mechanism of this teaching. We'll get to that. But first, we have to talk about why this works. Why a man can lie on a cot in a Louisiana barracks for 9 nights, imagining a stamp on a piece of paper, and rearrange a military record that by every legal definition was already closed. Because if you don't understand why, you'll try this once, get nothing, and quit. And the reason you'll get nothing is that you'll be running the technique with the wrong theory underneath it. So let's fix the theory first. Then the technique will run itself. Here's the misunderstanding most people hold. They think the past is a fixed coordinate, a point on a timeline, something that happened and is now over and is locked behind a glass wall called yesterday. So when they want their life to change, they reach forward. They try to manifest a new future. They affirm, they visualize, they write checks to themselves dated December 2027. And then they wonder why nothing moves. Nothing moves because the future they're reaching for has to be built out of the same material their subconscious is currently holding, and the subconscious is currently holding the unrevised past. You can pour all the affirmations you want into the top of the funnel. But if the funnel is still shaped by yesterday's humiliation, the water comes out shaped like yesterday's humiliation every time. Goddard said it cleanly. He said, your past isn't a coordinate, it's a state, and states are portable. A state can be entered, exited, and re-entered. A state can be edited. And the state your subconscious is currently in, which is the state it acquired from yesterday's most vivid replay, is the state that's writing tomorrow. To put a finer point on it, Goddard borrowed an argument from a British thinker named J.W. Dunn. Dunn had written a strange little book in 1927 called An Experiment with Time. In it, he argued, using nothing more than recorded dreams, that time isn't a single straight line we move along. Time, Dunn said, is a stack. Every moment of your life exists simultaneously, side by side, at different levels of accessibility. The present is the moment you're most focused on. The past is the set of moments you've moved away from but haven't deleted. The future is the set of moments not yet focused on. None of them is gone. None of them is fixed. Focus is what creates the sense of being in one of them. Goddard took that argument and ran it through the lens of imagination. If time is a stack, he said, and if imagination is the operating system, then revising a past moment isn't superstition. It's a deliberate shift of focus, accompanied by a felt sense vivid enough to be filed as real into a different level of the stack. The original moment doesn't disappear. It just stops being the moment your subconscious is operating from. A new moment, occupying the same coordinate, takes over the operative role. That's the four-dimensional argument in plain language. You don't have to believe Dunn. You don't have to believe Goddard. You don't have to believe the cosmology. You just have to run the protocol and notice what your tomorrow looks like. So the question is no longer, how do I change tomorrow? The question is, what state is my subconscious in right now, and how do I edit it before sleep? That's what revision does. Revision isn't lying about the past. It isn't pretending something didn't happen. It's the deliberate act of replacing the felt state of a memory with the felt state of a different version of the same event. And the subconscious, this is the part that breaks every previous model of how this should work. The subconscious cannot tell the difference between a vivid revision and a vivid memory. It only knows what was last accepted as real. There's a reason for this, by the way, and the reason is buried in your own neurology, not in any spiritual cosmology. The subconscious evolved to do exactly one thing well: pattern recognition based on stored emotional memory. It runs your heart rate, it runs your breathing, it runs the 8,000 micro decisions per day that you never consciously make. It does this by reaching constantly into its library of stored emotional records and asking, what kind of situation is this? And the records it reaches into are the records that have been most recently and most vividly impressed upon it. most recently and most vividly. Those two words are the entire architecture of revision. Most recently means the last accepted scene wins. Vividly means the felt sense, not the description. If you describe a beach in flat words while feeling nothing, your subconscious files nothing. If you stand on a beach for 10 seconds with your eyes closed feeling the sun, your subconscious files a record that will be available for decades. The same is true of imagined scenes. The body's response is the filing instruction. If you replay the dismissal 20 times before sleep, the dismissal is real to your subconscious. If you revise the dismissal once, vividly, and then fall asleep on the revised version is what your subconscious accepts as the last word. And the next morning it begins building outward from the revised version. That's the entire mechanism. There's nothing else to it. No mystical machinery, no invisible signal, no cosmic permission slip. Just the deliberate, surgical, repeated act of editing the most recent emotional record before sleep. And here's where the door opens. Remember the question I asked you to hold. What if the only room where any of this works is the room you've been forbidden to enter? The room is the subconscious. The forbidden territory is the past inside it. And the door, the one you've been locked out of since you were 6, is held shut by exactly one belief. The belief that what happened is what happened. That sentence sounds like a tautology. It isn't. It's a smuggled assumption disguised as a logical statement. Read it again. What happened, meaning the event in physical time which has indeed already occurred, is what happened, meaning the only version of that event that will ever exist, period, full stop, forever. The first half is true. The second half is a piece of folk metaphysics that snuck in, dressed as common sense. Goddard's entire body of work is the slow, patient unhooking of those two clauses. Yes, the event happened. No, the felt record of the event is not fixed. The felt record is the operative version. The felt record is what your subconscious files. And the felt record is editable every night in the descending phase of sleep by anyone willing to slow down and run the protocol. You were taught that belief by the adults around you who were taught it by the adults around them. It's the most expensive piece of conventional wisdom you've ever inherited. Because the moment you accept that what happened is what happened, you accept that your subconscious is permanently shaped by a record you can't edit. And a subconscious permanently shaped by an uneditable record is a subconscious you can't change. And a subconscious you can't change is a life you can't change, which is exactly the life most people settle into somewhere around 28 and never leave. But the belief is wrong, demonstrably wrong. Goddard proved it on a cot in Louisiana in 1942. And a New York attorney, I'll tell you her story in a moment, proved it again in 2019 in a 16th floor apartment overlooking Madison Square Park, with a partner at a midtown firm who dismissed her brief in front of 3 associates. The room is unlocked. The door has always been unlocked. You just have to learn the protocol for opening it. There's a specific moment every night when the subconscious is open like a wound. Almost nobody uses it. Most people fall asleep watching their phone, replaying the day's grievances, broadcasting yesterday's defeat into the only neural state that will accept new programming without arguing. And so they wake up the next morning with yesterday's defeat written more deeply into their nervous system than it was the night before. They call this normal. They've been calling it normal since they were 6. We're about to stop calling it normal. Before I take you into the bedroom where the New York attorney finally figured it out, and before I hand you the protocol you'll run tonight, I want you to understand one more thing about the mechanics. Because if you understand this one thing, you'll never run the protocol carelessly. You'll run it like a surgeon. The thing is this: your subconscious is not your friend. It's not your enemy either. It's a servant, and it's the most obedient servant you'll ever meet. It will execute, without question, whatever the last clearly felt scene it received was. It doesn't care if the scene came from your eyes or your imagination. It only cares which one was last and which one was felt most. That's why people who pray hard for what they want and then go to bed worrying that it won't come get what they worried about. They prayed once. They worried for 40 minutes. The servant takes the 40 minutes as the order. Revision is the practice of making sure that the last order you give your servant every night before you close your eyes is the order you actually want filled. Goddard called this the pruning shears. You're cutting away the unwanted branches of the day, not denying them, not pretending they weren't there, pruning them, removing them from the place where they would otherwise grow into the structure of tomorrow. And the shears, in case you're wondering, are made of one thing: imagination. Felt imagination, vivid enough that your body responds. That last clause matters. Vivid enough that your body responds. Goddard had a phrase for this. He called it the feeling of the wish fulfilled, not the wish itself, the feeling of the wish already being a fact. The two are entirely different states. The wish itself is an outstretched hand. The feeling of the wish fulfilled is the hand at rest, because the thing has already been received. And the subconscious only accepts orders in the second posture. The outstretched hand is interpreted as want, which is interpreted as lack, which is filed as lack, which is delivered as more lack. That's why most affirmations fail. The affirmer is in the outstretched hand posture while reciting the words. They're saying, I am wealthy while feeling broke. The servant takes dictation from the feeling, not the words. The feeling is broke. The order is broke. Tomorrow arrives broke. Revision sidesteps this entire trap. You're not affirming a future, you're reporting a past. Past tense changes the body's posture. Past tense means it already happened. The body, when told a thing has already happened, doesn't reach. It relaxes, and the relaxed body files the report. That's the engineering. That's why Goddard insisted on revision instead of forward visualization for most students. Forward visualization keeps the hand outstretched. Revision puts the hand at rest. The same imagination is being used. The difference is the tense. Most people who try revision the first time stop too soon. They think the revision is over when they've described the new scene to themselves. It isn't. The revision is over when their body has accepted it, when there's a softening in the chest, a small involuntary smile, a release of the breath they didn't know they were holding. That's the signal that the servant has taken the order. Until you feel it, you're just narrating. After you feel it, you're commissioning. There's a New York attorney I want to tell you about. She had no idea any of this existed until a friend in Phoenix mentioned Goddard's name on a phone call in February of 2019. By the end of March, she'd run the protocol 11 nights in a row. By the 12th morning, the partner who dismissed her brief was assigning her his biggest case. But the most important thing about her story isn't the case. It's what she did on night 3 when she almost quit. Because on night 3, her body refused. And what she did about that refusal is the difference between people for whom this works and people for whom it doesn't. Let me take you to her bedroom. She lived in a 16th floor, 1-bedroom on East 26th Street, 3 blocks east of Madison Square Park. A pre-war building. Plaster wall. A bedroom with 1 window facing a brick air shaft. A queen bed with a white duvet. A small nightstand with a black shaded lamp on it. A glass of water. A book she hadn't opened in 2 weeks. She was 41, third-year litigator, midtown firm, 100-hour weeks. The kind of weeks where you forget which apartment you live in for about 4 seconds when you get out of the cab at midnight. 6 months earlier, she'd handed a partner a brief. 60 pages. She'd worked on it for 3 weekends. The partner had read the first 3 pages in front of her, at his desk, with 2 other associates in the room. He looked up. He said, quietly, that she'd missed the question entirely. He slid the brief back across the desk. He told her to give it to one of the other associates who would, quote, take it from here, and then he turned back to his screen. She walked out of his office. She walked to the elevator. She rode down 16 floors. And every night for 6 months, when she lay down in that pre-war bedroom on East 26th Street, the elevator ride happened again. The slide of the brief across the desk happened again. The phrase, take it from here, played in her head like a needle stuck in a groove. Her friend in Phoenix called her on a Sunday afternoon in February. The friend had been to a small Goddard study group in Scottsdale. She told the attorney, in the matter-of-fact way of someone passing along a recipe, that the attorney should pick that one scene, the slide of the brief, and revise it before sleep. Same partner, same office, same brief, but a different ending. The attorney was a litigator. She was paid to be skeptical. She laughed. She said she'd try it. She didn't think she'd try it. That Tuesday night, she tried it. She turned off the lamp on the nightstand. She lay on her back. She listened to the radiator click. She closed her eyes, and she imagined the partner's office again. The desk, the screen, the two associates standing in the corner. She imagined handing him the brief. She imagined him reading the first page, and this time in her imagination, he looked up and said, with quiet surprise, that this was exactly the angle they'd been missing. He told the two associates in front of her that the brief was strong. He thanked her. He set the brief down on his desk like it mattered. She ran the scene once. It felt thin. She ran it again. It felt slightly less thin. By the third pass, she could see the Venetian blinds in his office and the way the late afternoon light cut across his desk. By the fourth pass, she noticed her own breath had slowed. She fell asleep inside the revised version. She woke up on Wednesday and went to work. Nothing happened. She did it again Wednesday night. Nothing happened Thursday. She did it again Thursday night. Nothing happened Friday. On Saturday, night 3 of the protocol, her body refused. This is the moment that breaks most people, so I want you to hear it carefully. On night 3, when she closed her eyes and tried to put herself back in the partner's office, her chest tightened. Her jaw locked. The image of the partner setting the brief down with quiet approval suddenly felt absurd to her. So absurd that she opened her eyes, sat up, and stared at the ceiling. The original scene, the slide of the brief, the words, take it from here, was right there, 3 feet behind her eyelids, waiting to be replayed instead, easier to replay, more familiar, more true. She almost replayed it. The reason she almost replayed it is the same reason almost everyone who tries revision quits between night 2 and night 5. The original scene has been rehearsed. It's worn a groove. The body knows how to feel it. The revised scene is new. The body doesn't know how to feel it yet. And in that moment of unfamiliarity, the body interprets the revised scene as a lie. It isn't a lie, it's an unfamiliar truth. There's a difference, and the difference is everything. What she did on night 3 was small and decisive. She didn't fight her body. She didn't try to force the revised scene through her resistance. She did something subtler. She lay back down. She let the chest tightness be there. And she slowed the revision down by a factor of 10. Instead of playing the whole scene at normal speed, she played it like a film at quarter speed. She imagined entering the partner's office, the doorknob in her hand, the cool brass, the weight of the door swinging open, the carpet under her shoe, the two associates already in the room looking up. The partner not yet aware she'd entered, the sound of her own footsteps on the carpet. The brief in her hand, the weight of 60 pages of paper. She didn't get to the partner's response on night 3. She didn't have to. She just got to him looking up. And in the moment he looked up, slowed down, frame by frame, her chest released. The smallest amount, the tightness loosened, the breath she'd been holding came out. She fell asleep on the moment of his looking up. Nights 4 and 5 were easier. By night 6, she could play the full revised scene at normal speed and her body went with it. On night 7, something different happened. The revision started running on its own. She'd close her eyes and the partner's office would assemble itself without her conscious effort. The desk, the blinds, the associates, the brief, the quiet approval, and her body would soften before she'd even finished setting the scene. She knew, in the way you know a fever has broken, that something had shifted. She kept running it. Nights 8, 9, 10, 11. Let me tell you what happened in her body during those 4 nights because it's instructive. Night 8, the revised scene played by itself, but the office had developed details she hadn't deliberately placed. There was a framed photograph on the partner's desk she'd never noticed in reality. A coffee mug with a chip on the handle. The faint smell of the building's HVAC. The subconscious was now contributing its own details to the scene, the way it does to a memory you've held for years. The scene had crossed over from authored to remembered. That's the crossover. That's the marker. Night 9, she felt something almost embarrassing. She felt grateful to the partner, the same partner who'd humiliated her in the revised version. Not because she'd forced gratitude, because her body, after 8 nights of feeling the quiet approval as if it had happened, had reorganized her felt relationship to him. The grievance loop had loosened. She still remembered the original incident. She just couldn't feel it the same way anymore. The voltage had drained out of it. Night 10, she noticed she'd gone the entire day at the office without replaying the original. Not once. The groove had been smoothed over. The needle had stopped catching. Night 11, she had a small, strange thought as she fell asleep. The thought was, I wonder why I waited so long to do this. Not about the protocol. About the change. As if the change had already happened and she'd just been late to notice. On the morning of day 12, the partner stopped her in the hallway outside the kitchen. He told her that a major client had just signed on for a complex litigation. He said he'd been thinking about who to put on it. He said her name had come to mind and he wanted to know if she had bandwidth. She said yes. She walked back to her office. She sat down at her desk. She didn't tell anyone that day what she'd been doing for the previous 11 nights. She didn't tell anyone for almost a year. She still rarely tells anyone. But she runs the protocol every night now, and she's been promoted twice. That's the story. And inside that story is the protocol you're about to receive. So here it is, slowly. Listen the way you'd listen if a surgeon were teaching you a stitch you'd one day have to perform on yourself. The 9-minute pre-sleep revision protocol. Run it tonight. Run it for 1 moment from today. Just 1. Step 1. Lights out. Lie flat on your back. Phone in another room or face down. The room dark. Your body relaxed but not yet drifting. This is the only setup. It takes about 30 seconds. Step 2. Pick one unsatisfactory moment from today. 1. Not the whole bad day. Not the cluster. 1 scene. 60 seconds to choose. If you can't choose, your subconscious will choose for you, and it'll choose the worst one. Trust that. Step 3. Replay the scene once, exactly as it happened. 60 seconds. You're not trying to feel good. You're locating the scene precisely so you know what you're editing. The room, the person, the exact words, the exact felt sense in your body. Find it, then let it go. Step 4. Now imagine the same scene, same room, same people, same opening seconds, but ending in the version that would have satisfied you. 3 minutes. Take your time. Build the room slowly. Notice the light. Notice the sounds. Notice what's on the desk. Notice what the other person is wearing. The more sensory detail, the more your subconscious accepts the scene as real. If the revised ending feels absurd at first, slow down. Frame by frame, let your body catch up. Step 5. Run the revised version a second time, more slowly, 3 minutes. This time, you're not just describing it, you're looking for the body's signal. A softening in the chest, a small involuntary smile, a release of breath. When you feel that signal, and you will if you stay with it, that's the moment the servant has accepted the order. Stay inside that moment. Step 6. Fall asleep on the revised version. Don't replay the original again. If the original tries to come back, and on the first few nights it will, don't fight it. Slow the revised version down further and let your body return to the softening. Sleep is the seed. The last thing your nervous system holds before you drop is the order that gets filled. Make sure it's the order you want filled. Step 7. In the morning, do not check whether it worked. Do not look for evidence. Do not text your friend in Phoenix. The checking is a vote of no confidence, and your subconscious tallies votes of no confidence too. Move through your day as if the revision is already part of your record. Because the moment you accepted it last night, it became part of your record. The world hasn't caught up yet. It will. That's the protocol. 9 minutes, 7 steps, 1 unsatisfactory moment. Run it tonight. Now, before we move on, I want to flag 3 failures I see in almost everyone who runs this for the first time. Not because I want to scare you off, because I want you to recognize them when they happen, name them quietly, and keep going. The first failure is the failure of grandiosity. The listener picks the biggest unsatisfactory moment of the year for night 1. The breakup, the firing, the diagnosis. They want the boldest result, so they pick the boldest scene. And then, on night 1, lying in bed, they can't make their body soften because the scene is too big and too charged and too recent. Their critical faculty argues with every detail. They give up before night 3. They tell themselves the technique doesn't work. It does. They just took on more weight than the protocol can hold on a first run. Start small. A minor irritation, a clumsy conversation, a misread email. Get the body to soften on something light. Then, in 2 or 3 weeks, when the protocol feels familiar, you can revise the larger scenes. The second failure is the failure of constant monitoring. The listener runs the protocol on night 1 and then checks for evidence at every moment of the next morning. They look at their phone every 15 minutes for the text that hasn't come. They study their boss's face for any change in expression. They reread yesterday's email looking for hidden meaning. Each act of checking is a vote of no confidence. Each vote of no confidence is filed by the servant as a fresh order. The order is, I don't believe the report I filed last night. The servant cancels last night's report and replaces it with this morning's distrust. Don't check. The checking is the cancellation. Move through your day as if the change has already happened, because in the only place where change is filed, your subconscious, it has. The third failure is the failure of telling someone. The listener runs the protocol for 3 or 4 nights and then tells a close friend or a partner or a coworker what they're doing. They tell because they want validation. The friend, who has not run the protocol, has no felt sense of why it would work. And so the friend, gently or not gently, expresses doubt. Even a flicker of doubt from someone you trust is enough to undo a week of revision. The reason is simple. Your servant takes orders from your felt sense. Your felt sense is calibrated in part by the people you trust. When a trusted person doubts, your felt sense wobbles. The order is contaminated. Don't tell anyone for the first 30 days. Run it in private. When the results have arrived, when the partner has reassigned you, when the relationship has shifted, when the check has cleared, then you can tell whoever you want. By then, the felt sense is anchored in the outcome, not in someone else's opinion of the method. Those are the 3 failures. Grandiosity, monitoring, telling. Avoid them and the protocol does its work quietly. There's a 4th thing, smaller than the 3 failures, but worth naming. Sometimes, on nights 5 or 6, you'll notice a strange resistance you can't quite locate. The revised scene plays fine. Your body is willing. But there's a small flicker of guilt, as if you're cheating, as if you're getting away with something, as if the part of you that has held the original grievance for months is being asked to put down a heavy object and isn't sure who it is without the weight. That flicker is normal. That flicker is the identity that was built around the grievance reluctantly releasing it. Don't argue with the flicker. Notice it. Let it be present. Continue the revision anyway. The flicker will fade by night 9. What's underneath the flicker is the version of you who isn't carrying the grievance, and that version has been waiting patiently for you to set the weight down. Goddard had a phrase for that underneath. He called it the natural man, not natural in the modern sense of organic or untouched, natural in the older sense, the version of you that exists before the felt records started shaping you. The you that's still there underneath the layers of replayed grievance. The you that was last present, perhaps, when you were 6, before the door to the inner room got heavy. When the flicker of guilt fades on night 9 or 10, it isn't because you've talked yourself out of the original identity. It's because the natural man underneath has stopped being obscured by the felt record on top of him. The work isn't to add a new identity. The work is to stop maintaining the old one. Revision is, at its deepest, an act of subtraction. You're taking the unwanted scene off the top of the file. The natural man is what remains. That's why people who run this protocol for long enough report something stranger than improved circumstances. They report a quieter interior, less self-talk, fewer replays, a kind of internal cleanliness they hadn't felt since childhood. The circumstances do improve. The boss does reassign. The relationship does shift. The money does flow. But the deeper thing the practitioners report is that they finally have access to the inside of their own head as a place they can actually live, instead of a courtroom they're forever defending themselves in. That access is the original gift. The improved circumstances are the second-order consequence. Run the protocol long enough and you get both. Now we have to talk about what happened to Goddard at 4 a.m. on the 9th morning in Louisiana. Because that's the loose thread I left earlier, the question of what he saw in the dark before the colonel walked in. And the answer to that question is the deepest piece of the teaching. The piece almost no spiritual teacher hands you because most teachers don't know to look for it. Because the part of the story I left hanging is the part that explains finally why this works at the specific time of day it does, and why the New York attorney's body refused on night 3, and why the 7th step of the protocol, the part where you don't check, is more important than steps 1 through 6 combined. So let me take you back to Camp Polk. The 9th night, Goddard lay on his cot. He'd run the revision for 8 straight nights. The colonel's office, the stamp coming down, approved. The walk down the wooden step, the train to New York, the daughter running across the apartment floor. By night 8, the revision was running on its own. He'd close his eyes and the scene would assemble itself. The body would soften. He'd fall asleep inside the approval, every night, like a man falling asleep inside a warm coat. On the 9th night, he did the same thing. He fell asleep inside the revised version. What he later wrote, sparingly in lectures, never in much detail, was that he woke at 4 a.m. that morning. The barracks was dark. The 39 other men were breathing in their cots. The potbelly stove was cold. The Louisiana air through the screened windows smelled like wet pine and creosote. And Goddard, lying on his back with his eyes open in the dark, knew. He didn't know the way you know a fact. He knew the way you know a temperature. The way your body knows it's already accepted a decision. The discharge had already happened. Not in the world yet, but already inside him. The revised version had become more real to him than the original. And he understood in that 4 a.m. silence That reality is a delayed printout of what the subconscious last accepted. He fell back asleep. A small note about that moment, because it's the piece I most want you to carry into your own bed tonight. The 4 a.m. certainty isn't a vision. It isn't a voice. It isn't a presence. Goddard, who'd been raised Methodist and taught Hebrew by a rabbi and lectured for 15 years on imagination, was careful never to describe it in religious terms. He called it a knowing, a felt fact. The way you know at 3 a.m. after a fever has broken that you're already on the other side of the illness. Nothing visible has changed. Your body has shifted, and you know. Most people, when the 4 a.m. moment comes, mistake it for sleeplessness. They feel a sudden clarity, a quiet certainty, and they assume it's anxiety. They reach for the phone, they check email, they scroll, and the moment passes without being recognized. So I want to flag this in advance while you're still listening. If you wake at an odd hour in the small hours of any morning in the coming weeks with a quiet knowing in your chest about a situation you've been revising, that's the seal. That's Goddard's 4 a.m. moment, arriving for you. Don't reach for the phone. Lie still. Let the knowing settle into the body. Go back to sleep with it intact. A few hours later, réveil, then breakfast, and then, mid-morning, the door of the barracks opened and the colonel walked in. He walked to Goddard's cot. He told Goddard, with the polite Louisiana directness of a man who'd reviewed the file again and changed his mind, that he was approved for discharge, effective immediately. He should pack his things and report to the orderly room for his papers. Goddard packed his things. He took the train to New York. He saw his daughter run across the apartment floor. The thing Goddard saw at 4 a.m., the thing he never quite wrote down, that was the moment of the seal. The moment the inner record became real to him before it became real to anyone else. And here's the part that matters for you. Lying in your bed tonight, about to run this for the first time. That moment is available to every person who runs the protocol. It tends to arrive between nights 7 and 12. It feels like a sudden, quiet certainty in the body, often in the small hours of the morning, that the situation has already shifted. The body knows before the world knows. If you trust the body's signal and don't break it by checking, the world catches up within days. That's why the 7th step matters more than the others. The checking is the break. The checking is the vote of no confidence. The checking is the moment you tell your subconscious, in effect, that you don't trust the order you placed last night. And the servant, the loyal, obedient servant, files your distrust as a new order and starts building tomorrow out of the distrust instead. Don't check. Don't tell anyone. Don't look for evidence. Just run it again the next night. That's the discipline. That's the entire discipline. Everything else is decoration. Now, one more thing about timing, because we promised it earlier. There's a specific moment every night when the subconscious is open like a wound. We can name it now. It's the descending phase of sleep. The minutes between full wakefulness and full unconsciousness, sometimes called hypnagogia, sometimes called the threshold. The critical faculty, the part of you that argues, doubts, corrects, falls asleep first, before the rest of you. And in those minutes, before you drop, your subconscious is taking dictation without a copy editor. Most people fill those minutes with phones, with grievance loops, with tomorrow's anxieties, and the dictation that gets taken is whatever happens to be playing in the foreground during those minutes. That's why mornings feel like sequels. The dictation that ran last night is the morning that arrived. Think about how we've engineered our way out of those minutes as a culture. The bedroom phone, the midnight scroll, the before-sleep news check, the late-night email, the streaming series autoplay. Every habit of the modern American bedtime is, in effect, a refusal to use the most fertile 15 minutes of the day. We've taken the moment when the subconscious is most open to instruction and filled it with someone else's content. Then we wonder why the next morning's mood feels foreign, why we wake up irritated by people we love, why we walk into work already bracing, why the financial pinch we thought we'd put down is back across the kitchen table at 7 a.m. The dictation that ran last night is the morning that arrived. That's the whole sentence. Read it back to yourself. Then ask, what dictation is currently running in my last 15 minutes? And whose hand is on the script? If the answer is my own hand, deliberately with a revised scene, congratulations, you're already running the practice. If the answer is the algorithm, or my anxious replay, or last night's argument with my partner, you've just found the most consequential leak in your week. Closing that leak is the entire game. Revision is the practice of filling those minutes, the open wound minutes, the dictation-taking minutes, the minutes when the critical faculty has gone offline, with the scene you actually want filed. People ask, sometimes, why morning revision doesn't work as well. The answer is neurological. In the morning, the critical faculty is already online and fully armed. It got 8 hours of rest. It's awake, alert, and ready to argue. Any revision you attempt at 7 a.m. has to fight its way past your critical mind, and the critical mind has the upper hand at that hour. The order doesn't get clean. The dictation gets corrected before it's filed. You can do it, but the work is roughly 10 times harder than at night, and the result is roughly 1/10 as deep. That's why every serious teacher of this material, Goddard, his students, the few who came after, has insisted on the pre-sleep window. Not because of any magical property of nighttime, because of the simple fact that the critical faculty is the last thing to wake up and the first thing to go to sleep. The minutes before sleep are the minutes when your editor is offline. The minutes after waking are the minutes when your editor is most alert. Use the offline minute. Don't waste them. There's a secondary window most students discover by accident, and it's worth mentioning. It's the moment of waking, before the critical mind fully reboots. About 30 seconds, sometimes a minute, after you open your eyes. In those seconds, you're still partly in the dictation state. If you can catch yourself before the first thought of the day forms, before the worry about the inbox, before the count of the hours left, before the reach for the phone, you can briefly run a revised scene there too. Same principle, different window. Most people miss it because they reach for the phone before they reach for the practice. If you can train yourself to hold 30 seconds of stillness when you first wake, you can place a small second seal on whatever you revised the night before. That's a bonus. The primary practice is the pre-sleep window. That's where the work happens. That's the whole game. That's what Goddard taught for 40 years. That's what the New York attorney figured out on night 3 when she slowed the revision down. That's what every person who's ever made this work has stumbled onto. The realization that the last, clearly felt scene before sleep is the order, and that orders placed in the descending phase get filled. You can be one of them. You will be one of them if you run the protocol tonight. Pick one moment from today, the worst one, the smallest one, the one you've been replaying without realizing it. Bring it into the bedroom with you. Lie flat. Listen to the radiator click, or the fan hum, or whatever your room sounds like at 11 p.m. Run the original scene once, so you know the territory. Then build the revised version slowly, frame by frame, until your body softens. Fall asleep inside the softening. Don't check in the morning. Do it again the next night. The room you haven't entered since you were 6, the room I told you about in the first sentence of this hour, is opening to you right now. The door wasn't locked. It was just heavy, and you weren't taught how to push. Now you've been taught. I want to address one more thing before we close because it comes up in nearly every listener's head around now. The question is, what about the people in the original scene? The partner who dismissed you, the boss who passed you over, the friend who walked out. When you revise the scene, are you changing them too, or only your felt sense of them? The answer is both, and the both is the strangest part of the entire teaching. Goddard taught a corollary he called, "Everyone is you pushed out." The short version is this. The people in your interior life, the felt versions of them you carry, are not entirely separate from the people in your exterior life. They're coupled. When the felt version shifts inside your subconscious, the exterior version, surprisingly often, shifts to match. The partner who dismissed you starts behaving like someone who didn't. The boss who passed you over starts behaving like someone who'd promote you. The friend who walked out reaches out. That sounds impossible. It sounds like the kind of thing that would only ever happen by coincidence. And yet every student who runs this protocol with consistency notices the same pattern, and notices it often enough that coincidence stops being a credible explanation. The New York attorney noticed it on day 12. Goddard noticed it on the 9th morning. Thousands of students of the 1948 Wilshire Ebell lectures noticed it across the next 30 years. The pattern doesn't ask your permission. It just shows up. I'm not going to spend this hour explaining the mechanism behind that corollary because we'll be revisiting it in detail in a later chapter. For now, take the empirical observation. When you revise the felt version of someone in your subconscious, the exterior version often rearranges. Sometimes within days, sometimes within weeks, sometimes not at all, in the visible person. But the situation around you rearranges in a way that makes the original grievance irrelevant. The mechanism isn't your problem to solve tonight. The protocol is. Run the protocol. Watch what rearranges. Tomorrow morning, you'll wake up into a world that's still running on the old script. Your boss will say what he said yesterday. Your bank balance will show what it showed yesterday. The street will look like the street. That's fine. The catch-up takes a few days, sometimes a few weeks. The Louisiana barracks took 9 nights. The Midtown firm took 11. The catch-up is the lagging indicator, not the leading one. The leading one is the felt sense in your body in the small hours of the morning, the quiet certainty that the order has already been filled inside you. I want to give you one image to hold for that catch-up period, because most people who quit the protocol quit during it. The image is this. Picture an enormous ocean liner that's been steaming due north for 10 years. You walk to the bridge, you turn the wheel 1 degree to the east. Then you walk back down to the deck. For the first hour, the ship still appears to be going due north. For the first 6 hours, the deviation is barely visible. By day 3, you can see with a compass that you're heading east-northeast. By day 10, the destination has changed entirely. The wheel was turned in the first minute. The bow caught up in the next 10 days. Your subconscious is the wheel. The world is the bow. The lag is structural. The lag is not the practice failing. The lag is the practice working at the speed reality moves at. If you check the deck at hour 2 and see the ship still pointing north, you don't run back up to the bridge and turn the wheel again in the opposite direction. You don't argue with the lag. You trust the wheel turn and you go drink your coffee. You wait. That's the discipline of the catch-up. Most people lose the discipline because the deck looks the same and they panic. They run back to the wheel. They cancel the original turn. The ship resumes its northward course. They blame the technique. The technique never failed. The wheel was turned correctly. They just couldn't tolerate the lag. Don't be one of those people. Turn the wheel tonight. Walk back to the deck. Drink your coffee. The bow will catch up. Trust that. Live from that. The world is the printout. There's one more piece of this I want you to carry, because it's the piece that turns a one-time experiment into a lifelong practice. Revision isn't a thing you do for a week and then graduate from. It's a nightly hygiene. The way you brush your teeth before bed, the way you set the alarm, the way you turn out the lamp. It's the closing ritual of the day. And the day that ends without it is the day that hands tomorrow's authorship over to whoever was loudest in your interior life at the moment of sleep. Most days, that's the algorithm. Most days, that's the grievance loop. Most days, that's the partner who slammed the cabinet door. On the day you remember to revise, that's you, deliberately, with a scene you chose. You don't have to revise every moment of every day. You can. Some days won't even have an unsatisfactory moment large enough to warrant the protocol. And on those days, you can use the 9 minutes differently. You can imagine, in past tense, a small, ordinary scene from a few days ahead that you'd like to have already happened. The phone call where the news was good. The meeting where the room nodded. The morning where the bank balance had a different first digit. Same protocol, same posture, same body softening, same falling asleep on the felt sense, same servant taking dictation. The technique works equally well on tomorrow as on yesterday, as long as the felt sense is past tense. Goddard called this the dual practice. Edit yesterday, pre-remember tomorrow. The two together are how the lifelong student lives. But the entry point, the door we opened in the first sentence of this hour, the door you've been locked out of since you were 6, that door is opened by yesterday first. You learn the practice on territory you already own. You don't try to redecorate a future you've never visited. You start with the room you were in this afternoon and the conversation that went sideways and the partner who slid the brief across the desk. Small, local, recent. Tonight. Then, in a few weeks, when your body knows the softening on cue and the morning checking has stopped feeling necessary, you can graduate to pre-remembering. Until then, revise. One unsatisfactory moment from today. 9 minutes. 7 steps. Lights off, lie flat, choose, replay once, build the revised version slowly, run it again with the body responding, fall asleep on the softening, don't check in the morning. That's the whole job. There is one last thing I want you to carry from this hour. It's the simplest sentence I'll say to you, and the one I want playing in your head as you turn off the lamp tonight. You've been told your whole life that the past is the one thing you can't change, and the future is the thing you can. Everyone you've ever met believes this. Every self-help book reverses it for 2 paragraphs and then forgets. Every well-meaning friend assumes it. The whole architecture of conventional wisdom rests on it. It's wrong. Here's what's true instead. The future you can't directly touch. It hasn't arrived. You don't have leverage on it. Every reach forward is a reach into territory you don't yet own. Every affirmation about it is a hand stretched into thin air. The past, by contrast, has already been filed in the only place that matters. It sits inside your subconscious as the stack of felt records that's currently writing tomorrow. Editing that stack is the one act of leverage you have. It's the only steering wheel on the ship, and it's been waiting, available, every single night of your life in the descending phase before sleep. You didn't know it was there. Now you do. And the door of the inner room, the one you've been locked out of since you were 6, that door is unlocked tonight. It's been unlocked all along. You just needed someone to tell you it was openable, someone to walk you through the protocol, someone to point at the lamp on the nightstand and say, when you turn it off, the work begins. The lamp is on the nightstand. The protocol is in your hands. The room is waiting. The past is the only thing you can change tonight. The future will follow it by morning.